Service to the ruler of the empire itself imposes its own obligations on every close assistant. Girls were not allowed to show their own emotions, even if the emperor surprised them. As soon as one of the ladies falls in love, dismissal immediately becomes her only way out. All these rules also applied to Claydon Locarso, who was famous for his indescribable beauty. The guy himself was well aware of how much attention he constantly attracted from girls, so he chose as his assistant a lady who had a stern expression on her face. At that moment, Claydon did not yet know where this unusual choice of personal secretary would lead him. Amelia Valet was a girl with a difficult fate, but she preferred not to tell anyone about it. That is why she did not pay attention to the beauty of the emperor, although she saw him closest to everyone. Instead, the young heroine focused on work, as it was important for her to complete everything on time. So for the first time in his life, it was Claydon who felt embarrassed around this girl. Locarso was accustomed to the fact that his appearance would soon make any lady faint. However, from the very beginning, the knave behaved in an aloof and cold manner, which raised questions from the ruler. He only had to take one alluring glance at the lady, and she would instantly fall in love. But this tactic didn't work with Amelia, since Miss was used to working relationships. Claydon didn't want to admit that he had some strange feelings for this girl that he couldn't explain to himself, while Amelia herself did not even look in the direction of the ruler, since she had not yet had time to get used to the imperial palace. Although the lady performed her job brilliantly, she lacked emotional delicacy in her dealings with other people. The emperor's first acquaintance with this unusual girl began about a month ago. Then the butler selected candidates for assistants for the ruler to congratulate him on his accession to the throne. Many aristocrats wanted to cooperate with Claydon, who had finally replaced his father. Even the faithful butler Kamer Yun did not expect such a big stir from the youth. Of course, the crown prince has always been a person who has attracted a lot of attention from the outside. But this time, people literally didn't give Locarso a break, although he tried to contain their curiosity. The admiring and loving glances of aristocrats have long become a common occurrence for Claydon, so the guy skillfully handled the attention, bestowing beautiful smiles on those close to him. Each time, the butler was amazed at how lucky his young master was with his genes. While Locarso was still young, he gave the impression of being a man who could handle anything. The assistant's heart beat joyfully at the thought that Claydon had a lot of time ahead of him to rule. It was at this moment that the emperor noticed the young heroine, who did not even look him in the eye. Even then, Kamer knew that this girl was the daughter of Count Valet, who was causing concern to the empire. Amelia tried to behave as inconspicuously as if she wasn't among the young candidates at all, but Yun immediately realized that it was precisely on Count Valet's daughter that the emperor ultimately turned his attention, although he passed by. The attentive butler's instincts rarely failed him, which is why he had been working in the palace for a long time. The heroine had no intention of taking anyone's place when she came to work at the palace at the request of her own father, but Yun had other plans, so young Lucy Lorgard was removed from her position as secretary. Although the prince did not say anything, deep down he remained pleased with the decision of his faithful assistant. Amelia emanated such an interesting aura that the heir had difficulty taking his eyes off the girl. But inside the heroine's head, the only thought was that she did not want such a promotion at all. The girl clearly heard the cruel whisper from the side, causing her face to distort into a terrible grimace. Who would have thought that Claydon would see this expression on the girl's face and take it personally? The next morning, Amelia obediently listened to all the advice from the butler, hiding her worries well. Kamer was one of the best experts on the palace, as well as the habits and tastes of the young emperor. Yun understood what a great responsibility fell on the shoulders of this girl, so he sympathized with her in his heart, while the knave herself didn't even blink an eye. Although any other girl in her place would have fainted, the heroine remembered very well the past of the prince, who in his youth was sent into exile for killing a beast. Many aristocrats were already against such a cruel punishment at that time, because the monster oppressed them. Only enormous donations saved the prince from eternal residence in the territories of the Valet family, but the heir forever remembered how unpleasantly he was treated in the count's northern territories. That is why the knave had no choice but to pay off the current emperor. But the man had no money, so he sent his beloved daughter to work in the imperial palace. Amelia clearly noticed the way Claydon looked at her during their first meeting. The girl didn't believe in coincidences, But she was prepared for her sad fate from the very beginning. She had no doubt that even a kind butler could not save her from the emperor's wrath. After everything the heroine's family had done, the girl did not dare hope for anything good in the palace. Locarso's face remained calm when he saw Emilia, but she felt disgust in his eyes. That is why the lady was sure that the prince wanted to take revenge on her family for the humiliation of exile. When their gazes met, tension instantly filled the air around the young people, and only Kamer did not pay attention to what was happening, since he did not expect to see the heir today. The guy just returned to the palace yesterday after a difficult trip, but found the strength to work. This impressed the butler to tears, who could not even dream of such a thing. Clayton's father did everything he could to avoid work, but his son was radically different from the previous ruler. That is why Khmer was unable to take his eyes off the hard-working and diligent heir. Life in exile greatly changed the young man, who became much more serious and experienced. But Yun understood that the ruler would still have a hard time with an inexperienced servant without his help. Suddenly, Clayton volunteered to give Emilia personal training. As he knew the office well, no one expected that the emperor would have such a desire, because the girl was from the family of his enemy. This was a bad sign for the heroine, since she did not believe in the ruler's good attitude. Locarso's face did not bode well for the girl, but she was ready for any difficulties. Only now did the butler regret that he had decided to find a replacement for himself due to his advanced age. In fact, there was no hatred inside Clayton for the valet family, although he often thought of them at night. During his exile, a tragedy befell the imperial family, which led to the prince's return. Clayton personally stood up to the massive number of monsters that attacked the empire, and although he returned safely to the palace, he still dreamed that he was in the north. The frightening look of his new assistant raised many unanswered questions in the ruler. During his difficult life, Locarso learned to understand people's thoughts well from their faces. He often faced scorn from aristocrats after he was sent into exile. People hated the prince who killed the sacred beast, even though it was causing harm to the empire. No matter how hard it was for him, the guy did not regret his decision because he saved people. The population tended to quickly forget anything bad, so soon the prince began to be praised. Everyone believed that he deservedly ascended to the throne, as he stopped a huge wave of monsters. Finally, everything fell into place for the prince, and he took the rightful role that belonged to him since childhood. However, the guy did not expect that he would still someday encounter unpleasant alienation from the outside. Emilia's gaze seemed to pierce his heart, causing pain to the emotional ruler. That's why all his thoughts were occupied by an incomprehensible anxiety, because he had to work with this lady. He sincerely did not believe that any girl could not pay attention to his appearance. Heavy thoughts did not leave the ruler even in the morning, when he needed to think about work matters. Therefore, he did not expect that the assistant would dare to personally approach him with a question. The butler knew a lot about Emilia's family, so he treated her with respect and admiration. The valet clan has always been distinguished by its fearlessness and courage in resolving the most dangerous situations, so Kamer was always hoping to find at least one of these wonderful traits in the lady. Meanwhile, the misunderstanding between the boy and the girl grew stronger with each passing minute. The heroine felt that the emperor hated her family, which had not supported him in his exile. She initially set herself the goal of surviving here and then returning home safely, so Emilia kept all her emotions and feelings under control, trying not to show anything. Valet did not believe that the ruler had long since forgotten all the past grievances during his exile. At that time, the guy also felt that the lady felt hatred towards him, which came from her family. Every time the girl's expression frightened the emperor, although he tried not to show this fact. The feeling that Emilia did not believe in his knowledge of the palace grew stronger and stronger inside the proud Clayton. In fact, the heroine did not plan to insult the emperor because she was afraid of his reaction. But her face did not betray a drop of admiration when Locarso correctly named the location of all the things. The knave herself had very little idea of her way around the office, as she had only recently arrived at the palace. So she was surprised by the fact that the ruler even remembered the order in which all the things were placed in the boxes. But Clayton never received the surprised exclamations from the lady that he was so accustomed to. Her aloofness and coldness were perceived by him as disrespect. Although Emilia was simply a calm person, she quickly remembered the arrangement of things, which the emperor had correctly dictated to her. Although the guy himself had only recently returned to the palace, he was already so well prepared for work. The girl's silence made the emperor think that he had made a mistake at some point. But in the end, Emilia praised the ruler for how well he understood his office. However, Clayton still felt as if the lady was offending him. Although her words had a pleasant subtext, the guy himself didn't understand why he constantly expected a trick from such a sweet girl. Emilia seemed calm and attractive, but the intonation of her voice awakened unpleasant feelings in the young man. Clayton didn't like it when someone showed indifference to his handsome person, because it wasn't for nothing that he received the throne. But the girl seemed not to pay attention to all the merits of the ruler, thinking only about her work. Any other servant would have been forgiven for such a thing, but not the daughter of the knave. As the emperor's assistant, the girl behaved impeccably and gave no cause for doubt. But the haughty expression on her face did not give peace to the ruler, who wanted to see admiration. What irritated the guy most was that Emilia was right when she wanted to focus on work tasks. She was the perfect example of a servant who did not interfere in other people's business while working. This is precisely what Clayton didn't like. He was used to seeing admiration in the eyes of other people. Only the knowledge that he had to maintain his status as emperor kept Clayton from getting emotional. After their short conversation, Emilia had no more questions, as she quickly remembered all the recommendations. The girl tried so hard to avoid any problems when communicating with the ruler. Meanwhile, Clayton kept his eyes on the girl, who so carefully carried out all his orders. Emilia's behavior and manners immediately revealed her as a resident of a dangerous region full of monsters. No matter how hard he listened, the guy still couldn't hear the lady's steps, even though she was wearing heels. The northern lands still frightened the emperor. Although he spent almost 5 years in exile there, the people in those places were reserved and stern, although they helped each other when necessary. Emilia lived in that difficult place all her life, so the habits of northern people were in her blood. The emperor watched with respect as the lady studied his office with such diligence, but his emotions again acquired a negative connotation when the guy realized that the lady was not looking at him. Usually, no girl could ignore the handsome appearance of the young emperor, and the guy openly enjoyed the admiration, accepting any gifts from the aristocratic women in love. Wherever he passed, girls almost fainted at the sight of such a handsome man, and the young men envied the beauty of the emperor, who, in addition to his looks, also had money and status. Many compared Clayton to the son of the empire, and he desperately tried to shine for everyone as well. That is why the ruler did not understand why Emilia remained blind to his beauty. This question occupied all the emperor's thoughts, although he still had a lot of work to do. It never occurred to the ruler that the girl might sincerely not pay attention to appearance. It seemed to him that she must have had another reason, like some kind of family grievance of the Valet clan. After all, during his 5-year exile, the prince spoke only with Count Valet, who treated him rudely. So Emilia could well have adopted the attitude of her father, with whom she had warm feelings. During his entire time in exile, the guy was only completely defenseless in front of girls once. True, he would never have dared to ask Emilia whether she had been involved in that strange situation. Then a huge crowd of girls looked with envious glances at the prince's beautiful body, while the guy was just taking a shower in the river, because he was practically not allowed into the houses. The emperor refused to believe that Emilia would spy on him among the trees. The girl looked like a person who almost never left the house because she was helping her parents. This only made it more difficult for the ruler to communicate with the lady, whose emotions he could not understand from her face. Emilia seemed to remain friendly and calm, but the ruler wanted to see more. The heroine even praised the butler, who did a wonderful job of maintaining order. Once again, the prince thought only about the fact that he had not received any pleasant words from the lady addressed to him. He felt burdened by communication with the girl, but something inside made him irresistibly drawn to her. But the emperor did not expect that Emilia would even notice the absence of some things. His father didn't like weapons, so he ordered that any mention of them be removed from the office. But Valette remembered that the ruler always needed some kind of protection at hand. Even after a couple of days, the lady still hadn't found an answer to the question of what exactly the ruler didn't like about her. The heroine sincerely tried to help Clayton in everything, but still caught his angry look. So when Emilia saw the other assistants in the office, she was able to relax a little. This time, an aristocrat named Clanel Hines was supposed to report the successes to the emperor. This man had worked with Clayton's father, so the boy was ready to cooperate with him. He spent the whole night mentally preparing himself for the fact that he would have to show all the strength of his mind in front of people. The butler understood that the emperor would have a lot of mental work to do in the near future. That's why Kamer asked Emilia to make tea, which the assistant was only too happy about. In the north, she was the best judge of drinks, as it was her favorite pastime. While she had the opportunity, Valet tried to make life easier for the ruler of the empire. At the moment, the emperor was so focused on work that he did not pay attention to the lady. For the first time in his life, Clenel felt so excited when he reported the results to the ruler. From the ruler's serious face, it was unclear how much he would quibble over the words. Only Emilia guessed that Clayton needed writing materials for work, so the girl quickly came to Heinz's aid. Although he didn't have time to ask her about it, the heroine tried to keep her distance, but at the same time listened attentively to all the conversations. On this day, Valet was going to demonstrate all her abilities and skills to the maximum. That's why she rushed around the office so quickly, bringing all the documents for discussion on time. But suddenly, Clayton announced that Emilia had made a mistake and brought the wrong papers, although Valet was absolutely sure that she hadn't mixed anything up, because she had tried her best. The heroine was so taken aback that she didn't even dare say anything to the self-confident ruler of the empire. This mistake on the part of the emperor occurred because he lost his attention. All this time, the guy was desperately trying to understand what exactly his faithful assistant was telling him, but Clenel's diction was so poor that few people were able to understand his words at all. However, the man himself did not pay attention to the fact that he had problems with speech. And what surprised Clayton most was the fact that Emilia brought the necessary papers on time every time. The girl seemed to read Heinz's thoughts and brought in advance everything he needed to mention. Any servant in the empire would envy such attentiveness and efficiency, but Emilia's skills only further irritated the ruler, whom the lady did not even look at. Locarso felt that Count Valet's daughter was doing everything to ensure that Clayton did not make a mistake in his report, and this made the emperor jealous, because it seemed that the girl was looking only at her assistant. But only recently, Emilia promised that she would pay attention to any requests of the young ruler. That is why an undeserved contempt for the empire-loyal Clenel awoke within Clayton. No matter how hard Heinz tried to explain, the emperor was no longer in the mood to listen. His irritation was so strong that it could be felt in the air, although it remained incomprehensible to others. Everything could have been different if only Emilia had looked only to her ruler of the empire. However, the girl was so focused on work that she did not notice Locarso's emotional state. That's why it came as a surprise to her when Clayton suddenly pointed out the error. The heroine was absolutely sure that she hadn't mixed anything up, but she didn't correct the emperor. She was not one of those people who dared to argue with someone much higher in status than them. So, next to Emilia, the emperor could enjoy his impunity for a long time. Valet publicly admitted her non-existent mistake, just to avoid getting into an unpleasant argument. Clenel didn't even suspect a trick, although he tried not to miss a single detail in the conversation. Until the very end, the heroine did not understand why Clayton was angry with her, because she brought everything correctly. However, she did everything possible to ensure that no one else noticed the emperor's mistake. Locarso was so confident that he was right that he proudly puffed out his chest in front of the maid. He didn't immediately notice that the girl had cleverly brought the correct documents, along with the incorrect ones. Cold sweat covered the ruler's entire body as soon as he realized that he had been wrong all this time. But not a single emotion appeared on Emilia's face that would have revealed the ruler's mistake. Clayton had never found himself in such a stupid and unpleasant situation before. A feeling of gratitude towards this wise lady slowly spread through his chest. However, pride and stubbornness did not allow the emperor to thank Emilia for her help. If the girl's face had not been so indifferent, Locarso would have felt respect for her. And in the end, misunderstanding once again overwhelmed the guy, who decided to take it out on the poor assistant. Heinz did not expect that the ruler would suddenly find inaccuracies in his story. At this moment, the emperor was especially cruel, because his emotions were at their peak. He himself understood perfectly well that he had scolded Clenel unfairly, and that he had tried with all his might to help him. But Emilia's composure and calmness increasingly angered Locarso, who wanted understanding. That's why he became more and more heated, trying to prove that he was not only handsome, but also smart. Clayton's plans were indeed far more viable than anything Hines had offered him before. But Locarso was not satisfied with the admiration of his assistant, who already respected him. However, pleasant compliments from Clanel still appeased the Emperor, who was susceptible to flattery. So for the first time in a long time, the guy was genuinely pleased with himself because he proved that he was right. But everything changed the moment Emilia once again helped Hines. Locarso could not forgive the girl for the fact that she again did not look in his direction. Only the assistant was satisfied with the lady's help, which was provided to him in a timely manner. So the ruler's good mood was spoiled again, although he did not admit to jealousy. For some reason, the ruler couldn't find a place for himself next to the knave, and they didn't even know each other. Only Clanil noticed the Emperor's concern, although he tried to hide his emotions. In fact, Clyden had nothing to blame Emilia for, since she did her job flawlessly. And all this only made Locarso even more angry, since he had wanted to be loved by everyone around him since childhood. It quickly became clear to Hines that in such a state, the ruler would not be able to listen to him properly. Before leaving, Emilia asked the Emperor for forgiveness for her non-existent shortcomings. All this completely confused the ruler, who knew that the lady had never made a mistake. Clayton's mood was at its worst because of the mistake he made while working, but the butler was beaming with happiness because Emilia's training went quickly and was successful. The only thing that worried the camera was the girl's connection to the Northern Territory. He was right to worry that the relationship between Valet and Locarso would be difficult, but the ruler did not want to admit that he did not understand the young lady at all. It had been hard for him until now, but pride and stubbornness forced Clayton to keep silent about it. No matter how good an assistant Yoon was, he could not read the thoughts of his beloved master. So for the man, Emilia remained a wonderful servant who did everything on time. The Emperor also recognized Lady Valet's virtues, but it was precisely because of them that she irritated him so much. All this seriously frightened the butler, who was trying to maintain a good atmosphere around. Until now, he was troubled by memories of Clayton at the time when he was still a prince. The guy was already not deprived of attention at that time, but he often offended girls with his evil jokes. Kammer hoped that over time, the Emperor had become wiser and more relaxed in his dealings with ladies. But his constant glances at Emilia suggested that the ruler was not indifferent to her. The butler was most concerned about the well-being of the girl, who was a stranger in the palace. Although the heroine did not show her emotions, anxiety was really growing inside her. It was important for Yoon to make sure that Valet did not feel uncomfortable or anxious in the palace. But the girl's calm face didn't give him any clues, making him continue to worry. Emilia always remained polite and calm, no matter what was happening around her. The butler was grateful to Lady Valet for not trying to pry out any information. Only now did he realize that the girl's impeccable behavior had actually been irritating. But the heroine was simply making every effort to stay in the imperial palace. She constantly felt like she wasn't doing enough, which is why the Emperor was angry. But the butler knew perfectly well the true reason for the ruler's incomprehensible emotions. Yun didn't know how to explain to Emilia that Clayton was used to strong emotions, not strange calm. The man understood that the boy and the girl urgently needed to find a way to connect with each other. Until they do this, the knave will continue to blame himself for the hatred of the ruler of the throne. Only Kamer understood that there was no hostility, just a simple misunderstanding. That's why the butler came to have a private conversation with the girl he could help. Her face still showed no emotion, although deep down she was deeply worried. In fact, the lady felt respect and admiration for the Emperor. She just did not show it. This pleased the butler, who did not sense any hatred within the young maid. However, the girl's upbringing remained strict and overly polite, which is why she thought differently. So it seemed to Emilia that it was wrong to compliment the wise ruler. Kamer had no idea that the upbringing of the people of the North was so different from others. All Valet's thoughts were only about work, and she missed an important component of communication in the form of emotions. So for the first time in a long time, the butler was at a loss and could not think of a way out of the situation. That's why Yoon had no choice but to praise the unemotional lady. In response, Emilia allowed herself to smile for the first time because she felt awkward in the imperial palace, and this sight so amazed Kamer that he could not recover from his emotion for a long time. No matter how nervous the heroine was, the next morning she was again helping with the documents. But the work progressed poorly, as the emperor could not get rid of his jealousy of Clinel. Only Amelia didn't pay attention to this, because she was completely focused on work. The camera liked the fact that Lady Valet didn't see the emperor as a handsome and cruel monster. But until now, the boy and girl mistakenly thought that they hated each other for different reasons. But they didn't have to be at odds at all, since Yun had long ago settled all the issues with the North. Every time after the end of the working day, Clayton's face looked dissatisfied and thoughtful. Only the butler's conversation distracted the emperor from his heavy thoughts about Amelia's behavior. The ruler had no idea that the lady had always behaved this way and did not know how to live any other way. But Kamer still couldn't find the right words and only continued to praise the girl. What hurt Locarso the most was that Emilia never gave him a single compliment personally. The guy wanted to win this lady's heart more than anything in the world, but she didn't even look at him. For the first time in his life, Yun found it so difficult to help the ruler because it was a matter of relationships. Through jokes, the butler tried to convey the truth to Clayton about how stingy with emotions the Northerners were. Even his wife hardly smiled, but Kamer still loved her more than his life. But all this was not able to ease the emperor's resentment, who was angry with Amelia. Yun had long understood that people from the north expressed their emotions differently, but remained kind. All that remained was to convey this simple fact to the emperor so that his life would become more peaceful. After the butler's words, the ruler nevertheless thought about the fact that the knave did not hate him. Over the past few days, he had not seen the girl's face change even a little, so Locarso still had hope that Lady Valet was not listening to bad gossip about him. The realization that he had an opportunity for reconciliation became a balm for the ruler. Kamer saw that Clayton's face was gradually smoothing out, and this pleased the butler. Deep down, the emperor remained a little boy who valued recognition. No one had ever been able to deny his charm and beauty before, no matter how hard they tried. Many were ready to die of envy at the sight of Clayton, who was the son of the empire. But Kamer remembered that the ruler's appearance evoked different feelings in young Amelia. Before, Locarso had not even suspected this, although he had lived in the north for several difficult years. But it was his assistant who knew well about the customs and behavioral habits of the northern people. Lady Valet's silence and calmness did not at all mean hatred for people, because she was always like that. Only one emperor incorrectly explained to himself the communication of a girl who did not admire him. With his words, Kamer tried to hint to the ruler that he should be softer around Amelia, but it was as if Clayton could hide the charm he had possessed since childhood, due to good genetics. Even the butler found it difficult to look at the emperor without feeling admiration. That's why Locarso believed that the girl was blatantly lying to him when she hid her emotions and feelings. All this time, Yun had been hinting to the gentleman about the lady's character, but he didn't think that his conclusions would be like this. The ruler decided to gradually reveal his beauty to the knave, to make it easier for her. Only Kamer wasn't sure that such a method would actually bring results with Amelia. In fact, it was not without reason that Clayton was trying to find an approach to the maid who used to live in the north. For him, these were personal scores connected with long-term exile in those territories. Locarso was still tormented by nightmares about those difficult days, although he had long since defeated all his enemies. But the guy wanted no one else to dare look at him with contempt and mistrust. That's why he was so desperate to win the heart of Lady Valet, who remained an impregnable fortress. And now Clayton has found the answer for himself in the gentleness and gradualness of his own actions. He didn't even realize that the poor butler had been hinting to the ruler all this time about different behavior. So the next morning, a lot changed in the communication between the ruler and his assistant. The heroine behaved as usual and did not suspect that other emotions would be expected from her. From the very beginning, Clayton's behavior could have raised questions among many who knew him well. But Valet, as usual, didn't even change her expression, since her northern composure was stronger than her surprise. While Locarso tried his best to impress the young lady with his beauty and charm, but he didn't yet know that none of these dazzling techniques would work on Amelia. Clayton kept smiling happily, trying his best to show how good he was, and this increased the servant's desire to continue helping the charming emperor in everything. The girl herself did not understand why she suddenly gained speed that she had not had before. She couldn't get Locarso out of her head, his lips continuing to stretch into a sweet smile. The girl immediately thought that with such an expression on his face, Clayton was frighteningly flawless and handsome. But the lady was so accustomed to the lack of emotion that she could not respond to the ruler in kind. In the north, there were constant wars and a lack of resources, which made the people harsh. Many never smiled in their lives because they barely had time to feed their children and friends. That's why the girl felt so awkward from the emperor's perfect smile that he couldn't take his eyes off her. Meanwhile, Clayton waited impatiently for Lady Valet to turn to him again. But the miss could not find the strength in herself to withstand such a strange look from the young ruler. Inside, Locarso was full of desire to prove to the girl that he could be trusted and praised. But years of training in composure could not be broken in a few minutes of warm communication. So the girl was unable to say anything to the ruler, although he impressed her to the depths of her soul. Emilia was an ordinary girl, so the emperor's attraction also affected her. But Lady Valet would never admit that she couldn't take her eyes off the emperor. The wider and brighter the guy smiled, the more uncomfortable and confused the girl felt. So far, the heroine hasn't realized that all this time, the emperor was waiting for at least one compliment from her. Saying something like that to his face was beyond her strength, so Clayton was once again left with questions in his head. He remembered well Yoon's warnings that the northerners were cold, and only they could save him. At this moment, Clenel suddenly saved the assistant, who was under the impression of the emperor. Although Locarso had been ready to work before, he was not happy about Heinz's appearance now. All the ruler's thoughts were occupied only with the seduction of the servant, who remained silent next to him. But the guy wasn't used to giving up so quickly, so he smiled wider and more mercilessly for her sake. Everything would have been fine if only the heroine had dared to confess her feelings to the emperor. But in her family, it was not customary to act like that, so she just looked away in embarrassment. In this situation, only Clenel remained ready to work and desperately attracted attention to himself. Heinz prepared as much useful information as possible to keep the emperor satisfied. Finally, Emilia could breathe a sigh of relief as the ruler had switched to his assistant. The girl still didn't understand why Clayton had been acting so dazzlingly around her since that morning. But even during the assistant's report, Locarso kept looking at the maid, while Lady Valet was afraid to even look at the ruler, lest she fall under the influence of his smile. The girl's heart traitorously quickened its pace every time she saw such beauty. But Clenel was trying so hard to attract the ruler's attention that he didn't give him a chance to be distracted. The assistant was confident that today's information would certainly conquer the strange ruler of the empire. Clayton knew he couldn't miss a word of Heinz's report to avoid embarrassment, but all his thoughts were only about the fact that since childhood, everyone around him had surrounded him with attention. So for the first time in his life, Locarso himself tried to please another person who remained unapproachable. That's why Emilia's distant behavior hurt the emperor so much, because he was sincerely trying. And the girl continued to behave as if the person in front of her was the most ordinary and beautiful person. All this did not give the ruler any peace, since he did not understand what exactly he was doing wrong. In the end, the guy still ignored the entire report from his assistant, who didn't stop talking for a minute. Clenel was noticeably upset that he had once again failed to receive praise from the ruler. But suddenly, the heroine came to his aid, listening attentively to Heinz's every word. The girl praised her assistant with a smile, because she saw how hard he tried with the report, and this circumstance infuriated the emperor, who was seeking such emotion from Lady Valet. But in the end, she gave a smile not to him, but to Clenel, who could not boast of beauty and attractiveness. Emilia's calm face suited this timid and barely noticeable smile that illuminated her appearance. But at that moment, the ruler felt only jealousy, because he wanted to see something similar directed at him. No matter how much effort Locarso put in, all his attempts brought no results. The guy had no idea that the lady had actually felt respect and admiration for him for a long time. But her northern upbringing did not allow her to show such emotions to someone she liked. This whole puzzle could have been solved with a simple conversation, but Clayton didn't understand that. Looking at the cold-blooded girl, he decided that she just needed more time to open up to him, and the ruler could allow Emilia to be in his company even outside of work tasks. For this reason, Locarso even invited the girl for a walk, although he himself did not know what he was planning next. Along the way, the emperor was overcome by various unpleasant thoughts about what Lady Valet thought of him. The ruler did not try to win her favor without reason, because he had his reasons for doing so. Until now, many aristocrats wanted him dead in order to seize control of the empire. Clayton constantly felt as if his life was a pre-planned chess game, and in this confusing situation, help from Count Valet was an invaluable advantage. That is why Locarso set himself the goal of seducing the lady who seemed unapproachable. If the guy wanted to continue ruling the empire, he shouldn't have given up so quickly. He remembered all of Kamir's advice well, although he took it in a way that was convenient for him. That is why the ruler wanted to show the girl everything that was important to him. Emilia's face finally showed some semblance of surprise when they reached the training grounds. The lady had never come close to this place before, as she believed that she was not allowed to. This is precisely why the heroine felt so awkward when there were many men around. Once again, the emperor misinterpreted the emotions of a girl who was embarrassed for a different reason. Even in her own home, Lady Valet did not interfere in areas that only concerned men, and there were so many knights here that Emilia's eyes ran wild from confusion and incomprehension. Too late, Clayton realized that the lady was not suitable to accompany him to the site. But in reality, the guy didn't need help, because he only wanted to impress the young girl. Their perception of life was so different that until now they did not even come close to understanding each other. While the ruler tried to impress the lady with his methods, she only closed herself off from him even more. It did not occur to Locarso that he should deal with the northern people according to their rules, so all his actions did not bring any results and did not impress the young girl. But at that moment, Clayton was so carried away by posing that he didn't pay attention to her emotions. So, a week after arriving at the palace, the heroine began to think that she already wanted to go home. Every day, it became more and more difficult for her to understand the emperor, who seemed like a strange man. His smile and demeanor were dazzling, but they only repelled the modest Emilia. The girl's misunderstanding was only increased by the fact that she did not want to be on the court. However, the ruler decided everything for his assistant, so she could only obediently obey him. Emilia was immediately struck by the difference in budget, as the area in her house was several times smaller. But all thoughts disappeared from the heroine's head as soon as she saw the beginning of the training fight. Clayton attacked the knights as if his movements would determine whether he would live or die, so no one could stand under the ruler's onslaught for more than a few miserable seconds. All this was done to impress Emilia, whose father was also a good fighter. Fencing was an undeniable advantage for Locarso, who killed many powerful beasts. In moments of victory, a happy and sincere smile appeared on his face, which illuminated everything around him. It was this expression that pleased Emilia, who had been watching the guy's forced smile all day. If Clayton looked at Lady Valette now, he would see her true feelings for him. But Miss was forced to hide her emotions, because her father had taught her this all her life. And the emperor was so carried away by the battle that he didn't even look in the direction of the knave, whom he was trying to seduce. Although the fight was already over, the guy was not satisfied with demonstrating his greatness and experience. He wanted to gain even more admiration from the girl in order to defeat her once and for all. The ruler did not feel sorry to throw away the jacket, since he had many similar things, but Emilia always treated things with care, so she couldn't ignore clothes. While Locarso was preparing for another attack on the knight, he paid no attention to anything. Today, the poor fellow had the misfortune of having to fight against the emperor, who was thirsty for spectacle. So, after just a few seconds, the knight was defeated again, without even having time to get up. The ruler enjoyed his own greatness, because his battles always turned out spectacular. But his heart sank when he realized that Emilia was only looking at his jacket. None of the knights expected that the maid would miss such a beautiful moment of the battle. All of Valet's thoughts were filled with anxiety, as his jacket was stained with dust. But Clayton tried hard to show her his power, but again he failed. From the point of view of inexperienced knights, this whole situation also looked ridiculous and extremely dangerous. The boys immediately noticed that the emperor was initially in a good mood and gave everyone a smile. It was only during the fight that he became confident and cruel in order to impress the young girl. It was clear from Clayton's work that he had tried so hard, but in the end, he had gotten such a disastrous result. So the knights were horrified when they realized that the assistant did not even look at their master. While the heroine was busy saving the jacket, she did not notice the atmosphere around her. She carefully removed all the dust from the ruler's clothes, although he did not ask her to do so. Confusion was reflected on the ruler's face, who expected different emotions and actions from the girl. He had such a difficult time with Lady Valet, only because her northern customs differed from the imperial ones. But this did not mean at all that Emilia did not feel respect for the ruler she recognized. But no one could read minds, so the lady's behavior was interpreted as a desire to die. The only thing that saved the girl was that no one had ever dared to ignore Locarso before, and he laughed in confusion. The emperor increasingly liked Count Valet's daughter for her unpredictability and calm, so he didn't even think of punishing her for the fact that the lady turned away from him during the duel. Clayton's heart burned with the desire to continue to attract Emilia's attention in order to achieve his goal. He was so carried away by his thoughts that he completely forgot about the appearance with which he traveled through the palace. But Emilia could not ignore the fact that the ruler might be cold or uncomfortable. The guy thought that his appearance demonstrated true beauty and masculinity. No girl could resist a naked man, but Valet was special. So the ruler was wrong to think about impressing Emilia, because she had other thoughts. At that moment, the girl was most afraid for the image of the gentleman, who could be seen like this. In the north, in the heroine's family, no one was allowed to walk around the house without outerwear. That is why Emilia wanted to quickly help the ruler hide from possible shame. In her opinion, no one should see Clayton like this, because shame would be inevitable. But all this time, the emperor was trying to achieve completely different emotions from the lady, but he was once again unlucky. He still had no idea what a huge gap there was between them. In fact, the heroine tried her best, because in her understanding, she was proposing the right things, while the girl's simple words deeply offended Locarso, who had done nothing wrong. Once again, the emperor was completely confused because the lady misunderstood him. He didn't even think about shame and disgrace until Lady Valette told him about these feelings. Clayton experienced such emotions only once in his life, when he was still in exile that year. Then he went out into the street, almost naked, and from the cold he screamed thinly, like a girl. But what could Emilia, who had not previously communicated with the future heir to the throne, know about the shame? For some reason, the assistant's words affected the young man so deeply that he couldn't get them out of his head. No matter what the guy did, throughout the day, his thoughts constantly returned to that situation. And even deep into the night, questions continued to torment the mind of poor Locarso, who could not find answers. He was not ashamed of his half-naked walk, but now the ruler could not look Emilia in the eyes. And even the next morning, Clayton didn't feel any better, although usually sleep drove away all his worries. Out of politeness, the heroine behaved as if nothing unpleasant had happened yesterday. The girl was very glad that the ruler was in a good mood from the very beginning today. She still took care of him in her own way, remembering all the habits of the inattentive Clayton. In fact, Locarso was unable to sleep that night due to worries and anxieties, so all his hope was on tea, which always relaxed the ruler in any state. While his heart was torn with doubts, Emilia looked as calm as ever. This increased the feeling of awkwardness and confusion within Clayton about how he should behave. This time, even delicious tea did not save the ruler from the heavy thoughts that consumed his entire mind. He could not find an answer to the question of why Lady Valet did not pay attention to him. At yesterday's training, the guy practically opened his young and ardent heart to the girl, and she trampled him with her unwillingness to pay attention to such gifts from the ruler. All this again angered Clayton, who tried to behave much kinder and more caring towards the lady. He understood that any other girl in Emilia's place would have shown feelings for him long ago. What the ruler feared most was that deep down in Lady Valette's soul, she was burning with hatred for him. It seemed as if the heroine was ready to watch anything but the prince, and the guy was furious at the realization that his assistant continued to ignore his beauty. Locarso was not one to give up quickly on his way to a goal, so for him, it was just the beginning. The ruler had enough patience to break the unapproachable coldness of the Valet family. He mistook the girl's calm and dreamy behavior for a challenge, unable to live happily. But if Clayton had let go of thoughts about the lady's restraint, then the relationship between them would have improved. Emilia showed almost no emotion, but it was clear that she did not think anything bad about the gentleman, while the ruler was burning with jealousy and anger because he could not get the attention of the lady. Once again, she found something more interesting outside the window than the indescribable beauty of the emperor. The girl had no idea how many emotions her mere presence evoked within Clayton. The guy sincerely tried to make friends with the maid, but he didn't even know what they should talk about. Although Emilia showed politeness towards the ruler, this was not enough for him. The young man wanted to occupy all the thoughts and feelings of Lady Valet, so that she could not leave him. He was no longer bothered by the fact that the girl's feelings were greatly dulled due to her hard life. The more difficulties the emperor encountered on his path, the more fun it was for him to overcome them. And today, he decided to try a new method to finally impress his young assistant. Clayton knew that the imperial gardens were the finest sight that remained in the memory of many, so he watched with anticipation as the lady's expression was about to change. All the girls that Locarso brought here invariably admired the beauty of the peacocks, so these are exactly the emotions the guy expected from Amelia, who was allowed to see this miracle. But, as usual, the miss embarrassed the emperor with her calmness, because she did not think about the beauty of the birds. Clayton never thought he would get close to someone from the Valet family, who were known for their indifference. But now it was a matter of principle for a ruler who could not achieve his goal. He did not admit to himself that Amelia's appearance seemed attractive and pleasant to him. Although the girl did not show feelings for the ruler, she did not leave his mind throughout the day. That's why the guy involuntarily reached out to her for intimacy, even though it was undesirable for him due to his status. Clayton stubbornly wanted to see at least some bright emotion on Lady Valet's face. He knew that the beautiful views in the garden and the graceful peacocks were able to amuse anyone. These birds were raised tame, so they were drawn to everyone who came into their territory. But the heroine didn't know how to communicate with animals that weren't in her home in the north. Therefore, the girl was overcome by a slight panic, which was quickly replaced by joy from the contact. For the first time in a long time, she laughed happily, and this was exactly what the ruler wanted. But Clayton wasn't having fun, as the peacocks took up all of his assistant's attention. Never before had Locarso reached the point of jealousy towards animals, but now he could not control himself. Although he had always enjoyed interacting with peacocks before, the current situation only made him angrier. The emperor was lucky, and soon the gardener noticed the escaped birds, which had attached themselves to the people. Because of his anger, the ruler did not notice that Amelia was pleased with this little incident. The girl rarely had the opportunity to communicate with animals, although she loved each of them very much. As soon as they were alone, Clayton started a serious conversation about wanting to see a lady nearby. Previously, it seemed to the heroine that for each of the emperor's activities, he should have his own assistant. But in the end, it turned out that Locarso did not want to see a huge number of servants around him. The girl's help was enough for him, even though she resisted out of embarrassment. These words opened the eyes of Amelia, who had been confused and misunderstood all this time. The ruler did the right thing when he was not afraid to open up to the lady, despite her reserve. After all, now the desire to help the gentleman who trusted her so much had grown stronger in Valet. She had never held such an important position before, but she finally felt confident. So for the first time in a long time, Clayton was able to relax next to Amelia in such a beautiful place. Of course, the ruler's attempts to seduce the lady did not end there, because he had prepared a surprise. The girl clearly didn't expect to see such a huge amount of delicious food right in the open air. Locarso ordered all this to be prepared, especially for Lady Valette, but did not admit it to her. The girl decided that she should eat first in order to protect the emperor from poison. One could envy the determination with which the heroine tried all these dishes. Amelia didn't miss a single dessert, just to stumble upon poisoned food if there was any. At the same time, the girl's face lit up, because all the sweets were incredibly delicious. In fact, Clayton hated sweets, so all this food was intended for the maid. He was glad that Lady Valec's face finally brightened up in front of such delicacies. The ruler had already come to the conclusion that the lady's sense of beauty had been dulled by a hard life, so he hoped to hit her other receptors, and chose the taste organ first to test. Of course, Locarso checked all the desserts beforehand, so there was no poison anywhere. But the girl didn't need to know about this. Otherwise, she would have refused to try anything. According to Clayton's cunning plan, he will continue to conquer Amelia through such insidious means. Any girl would be happy to have animals and delicious food, especially in such a beautiful place. So the emperor's plan was not supposed to fail, because a smile was already visible on the knave's face. The ruler was not going to limit himself to desserts alone, so the lady also had food waiting for her at the palace. But as soon as Miss was convinced that the sweets were not poisoned, she stopped eating them. The girl initially thought that the desserts were intended for the emperor, so she ate a little. From the lady's description, the ruler concluded that she liked the prepared food. He generally made a lot of wrong conclusions instead of asking the girl personally. The guy tried so hard to please her that he didn't forget that sometimes you just need to talk. Therefore, he only caused unnecessary problems for Amelia, who would have liked to have done something different. However, the lady did not dare to argue with the emperor because he alone was her master. The ruler could ask the servant for anything, and she would certainly do everything carefully. And this time, Lady Knave had to eat sweets, although in fact, she didn't even like them. But the silent heroine did not dare argue with Claydon, who gave her such a strange order. Although they split the desserts equally, Locarso didn't even think about touching his food. Amelia was so enthusiastically carrying out the ruler's order that she did not immediately notice that he was not moving. Until now, the girl did not know that the emperor also did not like sweets, just like her. So for the heroine, his behavior became a signal that Locarso was taking revenge on her again. During his exile, Claydon's name was practically trampled into the mud, and the valet family did not help him. Therefore, the guy had to survive among enemies, despite his high status and reputation. So it was not surprising that he could feel hatred towards a family that did not help him. The lady really wanted to return to her family, so she silently hid her attitude towards sweets. At this moment, Amelia's greatest fear was that she would accidentally incur the wrath of the young emperor. Although Claydon seemed caring, Miss did not allow herself to be deceived by his casual concern. Valet was certain that the desserts were brought to avenge her father's actions. If Locarso could read minds, he would be horrified by the impression he left on the girl. And in the end, the emperor felt that he had improved their relationship as much as possible with his actions. Claydon was bursting with pleasure because he was able to please the girl in some way. He had no idea that in reality, Emilia was putting on a mask of indifference and politeness. The heroine was ready to endure a lot, if only the ruler remained happy and contented. But Lady Valette didn't expect the guy to go so far in his desire to take revenge on her. The girl firmly believed that the sweets were needed to mock her. So, as soon as she saw another basket of desserts, the lady's mood immediately soured. At the same time, the ruler cleverly pretended that he did not expect to see such sweet beauty here. For some reason, it seemed to him that Emilia loved sweets, so the guy gave the lady this gift. If only the emperor knew how much torment these endless desserts caused the girl. But he only asked Lady Valet to take these sweets for herself, without asking any questions, and the heroine did not dare refuse the ruler, although she was already quite tired of desserts by morning. What upset Miss most was that Claydon forbade her to share sweets with others. He wanted Emilia to enjoy the gift he had so carefully prepared in solitude. But with his restrictions, the emperor only made things worse, although he did not suspect it. The heroine perceived all of the ruler's requests as a personal punishment, but answered him with a meek smile. Claydon even allowed the girl to leave work early today because he wanted to please her. But there was no joy in Lady Valet's eyes after she was ordered to eat all the sweets herself. Despite the curious glances from the outside, Emilia did not share the sweets she received with anyone. She was only glad that the ruler's revenge this time did not affect her family, which was far away. But the lady didn't care about anything else, because she had enough moral strength and courage to stand firm. Only the people around watched the maid with interest, envying the amount of sweets she had, while the girl herself was ready to give a lot, just to get rid of this basket. But pride and honor did not allow the heroine to do this, because sweets were her punishment. Even now, at the sight of him, the lady began to feel nauseous, since she had eaten too much that morning. And there were even more desserts in the basket, and Emilia had to eat all of it alone. Since the emperor limited himself to only this method of punishment, the lady was ready to accept it. But deep down, she felt a little hurt that the ruler did not appreciate her efforts. What frightened the lady most was that Claydon continued to smile cheerfully at her. Even when he lived in the north, he was nicknamed a terrible tyrant because of his arrogance and cruelty. But the emperor's current actions, compared to his past battles, even seemed sweet to the ladies. The only thing that upset her was that when Claydon's revenge was over, she would gain a lot of weight. Her brother would probably be shocked. But now Emilia had no time to think about this nuance. At that very moment, there was a knock on the count's daughter's door, so she was finally distracted from her sad thoughts. It turned out that the butler decided to visit Emilia, since she still hadn't come to dinner with everyone else. He immediately noticed a huge basket of sweets that stood in the middle of the girl's room. This delighted Kamer, as he knew that Claydon's father had given his wife a similar thing. It was to the butler that the lady was able to complain about Locarso giving everything to her. Unlike the maid, Kamer was glad that the emperor showed so much attention and care to the lady. He had no doubt that his master treated well the daughter of the man who had previously been his enemy. But Yun suddenly noticed anxiety and doubt in the girl's face, although he hoped that she would like it in the palace. The whole point was that Amelia had no idea how she was supposed to earn the ruler's good attitude. The butler immediately suspected that something important had happened between the boy and the girl that afternoon, but it had only just begun to seem to him that the two were gradually getting closer to answering the questions. And in the end, Emilia only became more worried about her inability to understand the thoughts and desires of the emperor. Kamer sincerely sympathized with Lady Valet, who was in a difficult situation for herself, but he knew too little about what had happened today during his absence. The butler saw that the girl's feelings were sincere, and she truly did not understand anything. Kamer had a hard time maintaining the golden mean between helping the emperor and his servant. In the man's opinion, the boy and girl should have talked to each other and understood everything a long time ago. And in the end, Emilia was once again at a loss, not knowing why the ruler hated her so much. Yun was sure that Claydon would not have given anything to the lady if he did not like her. But for some reason, the girl refused to believe in such a simple solution to all her problems. She thought with agony about the sweets, eating which was a real punishment for her. If only Locarso had experienced different emotions during their meeting, the lady would not have been confused. But the eternal smile on the emperor's face from the very beginning made the knave at a loss. Although Kamer listened attentively to the girl, he was unable to understand anything from her story. Until the very end, the butler refused to believe that the ruler wanted to offend his assistant. But Emilia looked as if she sincerely believed in all the troubles she was talking about. The butler did not immediately realize that he was forced to participate in a dead-end conversation with the girl. Kamer had run out of arguments to support the idea that the emperor treated his assistant well, so now he could not convince Valet, who had a serious misunderstanding. Miss explained everything to herself by the fact that it was too early for Claydon to forget old grievances. It was not for nothing that the emperor was considered an unyielding man, because he was not even afraid of battles with monsters. But the heroine was from the proud Valet family, who also did not bow their heads in the face of difficulties. So Yun consoled the lady by saying that everything had its time, and she shouldn't get upset too soon. The butler's kind words eased the anxiety of Emilia, who wanted to live peacefully in the palace. Kamer certainly should have known what exactly the emperor's anger looked like and what its consequences were. That's why the man spoke so boldly about how Claydon had not tried to offend his assistant in any way. The guy even provided the lady with food, although for some reason it was only sweets, which the girl had already gotten tired of. It was only towards the end of their conversation that Emilia admitted that she actually hated desserts. This alarmed the butler so much that same evening he tried to hint about it to Locarso. The butler was most surprised by the fact that the ruler worked late at night. He knew better than anyone how difficult it was to deal with the affairs of the palace with almost no rest. Claydon himself behaved this way only because he allowed himself to spend time during the day communicating with Emilia. But Locarso did not regret anything, because the girl occupied an ever-increasing place in his huge heart. Watching his master, Kamer thought that in the future he would become the best emperor. So Yun carried out any of Claydon's requests, and this time he appointed Valet to all areas related to him. Kamer did not understand why the emperor suddenly placed so many responsibilities on the young girl, while Claydon had no idea how difficult it was to keep track of all his affairs at once. So the butler's advice seemed stupid to the guy, who himself was doing an excellent job of distributing work. Locarso overestimated the capabilities of Lady Valet, who was constantly under stress. This is because before, girls felt better only when they saw the ruler's handsome face. So Locarso did not expect that Emilia would even refuse a delicious dinner at the palace out of excitement. The guy thought he was protecting the lady, but the result was that she only avoided him even more. The girl did not admit that she did not like any of the orders from the young ruler. And the worst thing was that Claydon mistakenly believed in Emilia's love for sweet desserts. Even the faithful butler gradually began to get tired of the constant misunderstandings between the boy and the girl. It was difficult for Kameru to directly upset the ruler, who was confident in his own rightness and wisdom. So the assistant tried to convey through indirect comparisons that northerners don't like sweets. Yun's confessions came as a powerful blow to Locarso, who realized that he had been wrong all along. Little did he know that Lady Valet was one of those who would eat worms on the emperor's orders. The guy thought that they understood each other and had sincere feelings. And then the butler informed the ruler that the girl was not telling the truth about her emotions. But all this time, Clayton sincerely tried to reward her for her help, because the lady quickly learned everything. Out of frustration, Locarso even refused to listen to Khmer, whose advice had always been useful to him. In the end, Yun never dared to ask whether his master was trying to take revenge on the Valet family for the past. A heavy sadness hung over the emperor's heart, because just as he had become closer to Amelia, she had become distant. Until now, the ruler had not found the key to the heart of this strange girl, which is why he could not find peace for himself. The next morning, all the emperor's thoughts were finally focused on fighting the monsters. Clanel captured the ruler's full attention, as he had to decide how to fight the monsters. The matter was related to the northern territories, so Amelia carefully eavesdropped on the conversation. The girl had long known about the cave through which monsters periodically made their way into the empire. Only the appearance of an independent person distracted the ruler from his conversation with Heinz. Although Lady Valette had heard nothing about Marquis Diablo Rune, she did not dare ask about him. Clayton was wary of the man because he was opposed to him. The Rune family was one of those who did not want the emperor's son to ascend to the throne after the ruler's death. That is why Locarso was so wary of the aristocrat, that he was initially against him. Diablo Rune was renowned for his meticulousness in handling all business matters within the empire. He always remained collected and calm, even in the most critical situations, and this haughty, aristocratic face of his irritated many people in society to no end. But Amelia had a good attitude towards a man who was not afraid to express his opinion to others. For the same reason, Clayton invited the Marquis, because he would not lie to him on principle. In the end, he didn't regret at all that he had invited Rune to yesterday's meeting of the aristocrats. As the emperor expected, many dukes were against any of his decisions because they did not respect him, and only Diablo remained neutral, since he did not want to oppose the ruler out of spite. Then Clayton deliberately demanded the impossible from his assistants in order to put them in a difficult situation. None of the men suspected that Locarso was simply interested in their reaction. The emperor played a dangerous game when he provoked the aristocrats to see their true colors. So soon rebellion arose among the dukes, who were unhappy with this attitude. If there had not been more prudent people among them, a rebellion against the ruler would have already arisen. But in the end, people were forced to remain silent to avoid punishment early in Locarso's reign. Even the calculating Diablo couldn't guess why Clayton made so many demands on the aristocrats. At that moment, it seemed to everyone around that the emperor had undeservedly taken his place on the throne. Lady Valet knew about this story, so she did not expect Rune to visit Locarso after the meeting. Diablo was full of hope that his opinion would be useful to the young ruler. But Clayton didn't let the guy say a word, as he needed to finish his discussions. Locarso showed with his whole appearance that he was not ready to be distracted by the Marquis ahead of time. This is how, for the first time in his life, Rune felt unwanted in the palace, which he always helped. Meanwhile, the ruler demanded that even poor Heinz repair the bridge and blow up the cave. He stubbornly refused to understand why these matters were so difficult for everyone. Having nothing better to do, Diablo eavesdropped on the emperor's indignation, silently drawing his own conclusions. The guy couldn't imagine how stupid the reasoning of the man who ascended the throne would be. In fact, it was all a big act, because Clayton did not want to be feared. That's why he acted as if he were a grown-up child, who decided to play at being a ruler. However, Locarso's anger about the holes in the budget was genuine, as it was unacceptable. Even Clanel could not help the ruler in this matter, since he did not know who the traitor was. Clayton pretended to be ready to forgive his assistant for his carelessness in financial matters today. But Heinz understood that in the future, the emperor's attitude would only become stricter. This foreshadowed huge problems for Clanel, who wanted to keep his job. Rune shared the administrator's concerns, but could do nothing to help him in this situation. This time, Clanel was lucky, and Clayton soon let him go without further questioning. All this time, the heroine stood silently nearby, and her presence gave the ruler confidence. In front of this girl, he always tried to appear stricter and wiser in order to impress her, but the calmness on Amelia's face seemed to have become permanently attached to her. and Miss felt nothing. As soon as she received a specific instruction, the girl immediately rushed to carry it out. Diablo watched the quiet lady absent-mindedly until suddenly jealousy of him awakened in Clayton. But the Marquise did not think anything bad at all, but he still became a rival in the eyes of the ruler. The desire to possess Emilia was so strong in Locarso that he did not allow anyone to look at her. Rune was afraid to argue with a man who, even before his status as emperor, was unbearable and invincible. Previously, Diablo did not believe the rumors that Clayton single-handedly stopped the wave of evil monsters. That is why he opposed his accession to the throne, supporting the old emperor. But all attempts to find Count Valet's intervention in this matter ultimately failed miserably. So Rune, like many other people, had to come to terms with the new ruler of the empire. Only now did Diablo realize how dangerous Clayton, whom everyone had underestimated, could be. The boy tried his best to remain calm among such absurd people of the palace. Only Locarso did not feel a drop of worry, since he was in control of the situation. In fact, Rune came to ask questions about the budget, because he noticed that Clayton did not try to hide this matter. Diablo saw through the Emperor's plan, which from the very beginning had wanted to lure out all the spies in the palace. The Marquise's only concern was that at this rate there would be almost no people left to work in the palace. He didn't expect that the ruler didn't see any problem in this, since he could handle everything himself. In addition, Clayton had Emilia as his assistant, who possessed great skills. That's why Locarso had no doubt that together with the girl, he would sort out all the problems. It had never occurred to him how difficult a task he had undertaken, because Clayton did not like to retreat, while Diablo was trying to convey to the ruler that the palace needed a lot of servants. But in the end, these words only angered Locarso even more, for whom only Emilia was enough. Rune had not yet had time to understand what a stubborn and crazy person he had gotten involved with while trying to prove something. The heroine had not yet intervened in the conversations, although she was the emperor's personal assistant. She knew from the start that she was heading into the very center of an invisible political battle. The girl was carefully warned about this by her father, who hated the thought of her exile. But the count was powerless in this situation, because he had done too much bad to the current ruler. At that moment, Lady Valet did not suspect that all her father's serious worries had a meaning. Only now did she realize what a difficult situation she found herself in due to the ruler's wickedness. Before the girl's eyes, a real war zone was unfolding, which affected her too. But the desire to return home was so strong within the lady that she silently endured all the difficulties. Even Marquis Rune was unaware of how dire his situation was in the palace now, but he still wanted to propose an alliance to the emperor, who had almost no friends among the aristocrats. Clayton valued his own personality so highly that he devalued the most expensive gifts from the Rune family. At this point, Diablo found himself in a disadvantageous position, but he still insisted on his own. However, Locarso was not sure that the Rune clan would be able to help him during the war. Diablo had no objection to the fact that his lands were too far from the center of the empire, so the emperor reasoned correctly when he believed that such assistance would be of little use to him. With each passing second, the feeling inside Rune grew stronger, as if all the juices were being squeezed out of him. The guy was frightened even by the look of the cute maid, who looked as if she had been through several wars. He could not even imagine how strongly all the people in the palace were striving for madness, while Clayton still felt like the king of the situation, and therefore didn't even worry. He skillfully played the fool so that no one would dare take his place on the throne. So it seemed to Rune more and more that he would soon go crazy because of the antics of the new ruler. Everything was moving towards the point that Diablo had nothing to offer Locarso, who was known for his demanding nature. So the guy had no choice but to quickly escape from the palace. Although Emilia knew how to help Marquis Rune, she did not dare to interfere in her master's conversations. In fact, Clayton had a plan in his head for a long time, but he didn't want Valet to hear it. The girl's face reflected amazement when the ruler asked her to cover her ears and turn away. Locarso trusted his assistant, so he was confident that these actions of hers would be sufficient. The heroine found this request strange, since she could easily have left the room and gone into the corridor. But the girl's head was firmly entrenched in her father's request, which told her not to disobey the ruler's orders. And now it was important to Clayton that Emilia stayed close, even though she couldn't hear anything. Who was Lady Valette anyway? to disobey the master who ruled the entire empire. Under the surprised gaze of Marquis Rune, the lady obediently turned away and even began to hum something. The emperor's madness greatly frightened Diablo, who only wanted to conclude a peace treaty. But what surprised him even more was that Clayton wanted to discuss Count Valette behind the lady's back. The Marquis remembered that it was this man who had been able to hold the northern borders of the empire in the past. But he still didn't understand what the ruler himself thought about the people with whom he lived in exile. It was impossible to guess from Clayton's face what exactly the guy had been trying to achieve all this time. The oppressive atmosphere between the emperor and Diablo was broken only by Emilia's gentle voice. In the process, the girl forgot herself and began to hum her favorite northern song from childhood. The heroine knew all the words and intonations well, as she often sang it at her native estate in the north. At that moment, Lady Valette seemed beautiful to both boys, who were silently watching her. But Marquis Rune didn't come to the emperor's office to listen to songs. However, Clayton did not want to talk to him anymore, because he wanted to enjoy Lady Valette's voice. Diablo had already given up hope that he would be able to form an alliance with the evil ruler. But suddenly, Locarso announced that he would soon contact the guy who was full of courage. So the Marquis left the office with mixed feelings, because he still couldn't understand anything. He was sad that his father had not warned him in time about the madness of the current ruler. As soon as Rune left, Emilia immediately stopped singing, because there was no longer any need for it. Although curiosity burned the girl from within, she did not dare to find out about the topic of the gentleman's conversation. Clayton was incredibly grateful to Lady Valette for her boundless devotion and obedience. That's why he prepared a special gift for the lady, which he had never given to anyone in his life. At first glance, even the red box looked expensive, to say nothing of the item inside. It turned out that the ruler had prepared a satin handkerchief for the lady, which was embroidered with the symbols of the empire. There were only a few such things in the entire country, due to the difficulty of their manufacture. Until now, Clayton remembered the incident when the girl gave her scarf to Clenil's assistant. Heinz was so moved at that moment that he never returned the lady's thing, even though he no longer needed it. So the emperor personally helped Emilia, because he wanted to help her even in such small things. As a ruler, the heroine could not refuse the guy, so she obediently accepted this gift. At that moment, the gentleman's face was so close that it embarrassed the lady with its beauty and grace. The only thing that saved Emilia was that she knew how to hide the emotions that were breaking through. Locarso knew how valuable was the thing he so easily gave to the maid. So it was no surprise that Miss was going to take care of such an expensive scarf. Lady Valette still felt it was wrong that Clayton had given her such a thing, but the gratitude inside the girl was so great that she did not dare refuse the gift. All this time, Locarso tried to notice at least one emotion on the face of the calm and quiet girl. But the Count's daughter's expression never changed, despite the fact that she was filled with recognition for the ruler. He was so worried because last time he made a mistake with a huge pile of sweets. If the emperor had been more attentive, he would have noticed a small hint of a smile on the heroine's face. Emilia was not able to express emotions clearly, but she thanked people for their gifts with dignity. This time, the ruler did notice that the girl smiled at him a little at the end of the conversation. Joy filled Clayton's entire consciousness, which he had been trying to achieve for so long. As soon as he was left alone, the ruler gave free rein to the feelings he had been carefully restraining. Now the guy once again believed that not all was lost in his relationship with Lady Valette. So, until the very evening, a mysterious smile played on the emperor's face, revealing his happiness. The next morning began with some adventures, although the weather promised to be sunny all day. From the very beginning, the heroine felt nervous, but she still remained in the shadows. Only the emperor maintained an incredible calm that unnerved everyone else. The whole point was that the aristocrats again came to a meeting with the ruler to discuss issues. They planned to overwhelm young Clayton with numbers so that he would back down from the idea of collapsing the cave. Only Locarso successfully pretended not to notice the hints from the dukes and counts. Emilia subtly felt that a real struggle between wills was now taking place. The emperor had already identified for himself the most dangerous person among all the aristocrats present. It was Count Lorigard, who had worked closely with Clayton's father in the past. But now this man decided that he had the right to object to the current young ruler. It was the Lorigard family and the Brondel family that were the most dangerous figures for Clayton. Both aristocrats understood each other's strength and therefore tried to support each other in any situation. Despite everything, Locarso had no intention of giving in, and his gaze grew increasingly stubborn. No one from high society had ever had to argue with such a confident man before. Clayton knew that monsters could penetrate the empire if the issue with the bridge and the cave was not resolved, and he had many arguments in favor of the fact that he made a great contribution to the defense of the country. So, in the end, the aristocrats had nothing to say to the young ruler, who turned out to be so prepared. At that moment, Emilia was struck by the persistence and inflexibility of the wise Clayton. The heroine knew that there was no one who understood the situation with the monsters better than Locarso. This is all because the guy spent several hard years fighting them, and yet returned unharmed. During this time, Clayton learned in detail the consciousness and thoughts of the creatures that were trying to take over the empire. Even Emilia, although she was born in the north, knew much less about these terrible creatures. Several years ago, the girl had the opportunity to personally observe how terrible and cruel monsters are. The monsters always attacked unexpectedly, causing panic among the ordinary knights. At that moment, Count Valet's army did not have enough power to cope with the attack. The knights understood that they would soon be forced to die for the sake of the empire. But the appearance of Clayton changed everything, because no one expected the guy to be so strong. He took a small group of assistants with him and quickly dealt with all the monsters. Since then, rumors have been circulating about the fearlessness of the heir, who was worthy of becoming emperor. But Locarso himself did not strive for fame, and he did not even need the status of a swordmaster. The guy always proved his skills in practice, and he didn't care what anyone said about him. So soon, all the knights bowed their heads before the man who was many times stronger than them. Quite quickly, Clayton achieved a level where no one could deny his abilities and experience. Only Count Valet, who held the borders in the north, looked the young ruler in the eyes with confidence. While most aristocrats preferred to turn away from his proposals, the men did not believe that a worthy successor had come to replace the previous ruler. So it came as a surprise to them that Marquis Rune suddenly supported the emperor's decision. Diablo did everything possible to get Clayton to accept his offer of cooperation. And now, Locarso appreciated the fact that the guy had sided with him on the issue of the cave collapse. As soon as the meeting ended, Emilia politely escorted all the aristocrats to the exit. Only Clayton remained in place, blinding Marquis Rune with his beauty and elegance. Until now, Diablo had no idea how Lady Valet could remain calm in any situation. The guy himself could barely restrain himself, because he saw that the emperor was deliberately provoking people. But it was useless for Locarso to explain that his approach was fundamentally wrong to his assistants. No matter how much Rune tried, the ruler did not even slightly lean towards compromise. What offended Clayton most was that the aristocrats did whatever they wanted. Neither Emilia nor Diablo told the emperor that he had behaved in exactly the same way. Lady Valet actually ran away as quickly as possible, just to avoid taking part in the conversation. This was because, even without her presence, Locarso's thoughts were filled with concern for the empire. He was lucky to have a marquis who had some useful ideas about how to make life better. But all his arguments and advice were shattered by the insurmountable wall of imperial stubbornness. Diablo had already regretted several times that he had ever entered into an alliance with the young ruler. Clayton had no regard for any of the men who had previously served his father with truth and loyalty. Rune partly understood the thinking of the young ruler, who was stubbornly rejected by the other aristocrats. But long conversations weren't part of Locarso's plans, so the guys said goodbye for the day. The more the emperor talked with the aristocrats, the more cunning and dodgy they seemed to him. On this day, the ruler no longer had the desire to think about work, as he wanted to rest. But for some reason, Emilia still didn't show up, even though her workday wasn't over. For several hours, Clayton obediently waited for the maid to appear, and became increasingly angry. He kept his eyes on the front door until the evening, but the girl never appeared in the office. Due to irritation, Locarso was unable to even rest properly, although he had been very tired before. Clayton genuinely didn't understand why he should have expected Lady Valet to return at all. Previously, the guy thought that Emilia was not the type to shirk work, but in fact, he knew practically nothing about the lady, even though she worked for him. Interacting with the count's daughter reminded the emperor of a situation involving monsters. Their disappearance and appearance were as unpredictable as the actions of the young girl. This only made things more difficult for the emperor, since he had strived for stability all his life. But the ruler didn't even have the thought of exchanging Amelia for someone else. He became so attached to the count's daughter that he was ready to tolerate even her long absences from the office. When the heroine appeared, it turned out that she had been brewing tea for Clayton all this time. The ruler immediately felt a scent that smoothed out all his irritation and made him forget his worries. He could not have imagined that Amelia would share such valuable tea from the north with her master. But when Lady Valette was nearby, all the emperor's anger somehow evaporated every time. Moreover, the girl apologized for the delay, as it took time to prepare the tea. But Clayton had a hard time accepting the fact that the lady had more important things to do than him. Seeing the deterioration of the gentleman's condition, the heroine experienced genuine anxiety and fear. From the very beginning, she tried to do everything to ensure that Locarso did not have any health problems. But Clayton always denied that he was also subject to illness, like all ordinary people, while Lady Valette believed that anyone was capable of falling ill at the wrong time. As soon as Miss mentioned this, Clayton reminded her that he had destroyed a whole bunch of monsters with his own hands, so the mere thought of his weakness caused so much anger in the guy that he could not restrain himself. But for some reason, he wanted to continue receiving care from Amelia, so the guy hid his irritation. Naturally, the ruler demanded a story from the lady about where she had been all this time. It turned out that Amelia had studied all the information about the cave in the Imperial Library. This is how she was able to find out that it only took one blow to blow up that area. The heroine herself felt awkward, because she had interfered in complex imperial affairs without permission. It was unclear from Clayton's face how angry he was that Valet had violated the boundaries. Out of fear and anxiety, Amelia wanted to leave the office as quickly as possible, but the emperor did not allow her to do so. The whole point was that in the face of the count's daughter, Clayton saw salvation because she found a way out of the situation. If Valet was right, then Locarso could figure out the cave even without the help of the aristocrats. This would have been real happiness for the emperor, if only the girl's face had not been so sad. In this situation, Clayton was only concerned about why the count's daughter had decided to help him at all. It turned out that Amelia supported the ruler's decision to fight the monsters from the very beginning. Clayton was pleased to know that the girl was on his side even in this situation, so he didn't blame her for the fact that Amelia didn't want to tell anyone about her wise suggestions. Lately, Locarso had barely let even Rune near him, even though he was a famous aristocrat, so anger and envy could fall precisely on Lady Valet, who was closest to the ruler. The boy knew that the aristocrats were planning to force the northern lands to pay an exorbitant tribute, so Amelia was interested in finding salvation for her beloved family. Ideally, it was the emperor who should have found a solution that would save the country's remote lands. But in the end, Clayton failed to do this, which made him feel an incomprehensible sadness inside. It was for this reason that the emperor was unable to respond to the maid's greetings. But Amelia attributed everything to the fact that the ruler began to treat her worse because of the interference. However, the lady did not regret it, because she could not remain silent when she was able to help in any way. It wasn't just the heroine's desire to protect her family, although that was part of her anxiety, but Lady Valet was much more worried about the monster people perceived Clayton as. While the miss managed to make sure that there was a lot of kindness and caring in the guy, that's why the girl was so eager to achieve forgiveness, so that there would be no more awkwardness. But Amelia did not take into account the fact that the emperor's inner pain could be too serious. Panic spread through Lady Valet's body when she realized that Clayton did not want to see her. Locarso couldn't admit to his assistant that he had a reason for behaving this way towards her. Instead, he was forced to offend Amelia, and he hated himself when he saw the girl's face. However, the ruler did not want to show his servant's pain, so it was easier for him to drive her away. In fact, it was not at all about the lady's recent help, but about the poor health of the empire's ruler. But Clayton wasn't used to talking honestly about his feelings, so he avoided open communication until the very end. At that moment, he needed anyone's help, just so that Amelia wouldn't interfere in this matter. The boy waited impatiently for the court magician, because only he could help him, so he involuntarily took out his anger on those close to him, because he felt terrible pain inside. What hurt Clayton the most was that his appearance was now far from the usual ideal. Therefore, the assistants were forced to run at double speed just to help. The wait dragged on too long, Although Locarso was confident that he could survive in such a situation, only when Maurice Ravaillain arrived did the emperor feel better morally. Since childhood, the ruler was accustomed to poisons, but still experienced terrible pain because of them. So the long wait was hard for him, as the magician was a little delayed on the way. It was the first time in a long time that Maurice had seen Claydon in such poor physical condition. Ravaillain always believed that Locarso took at least a little care of himself, even if he did it poorly. But here it turned out that the ruler, in a short period of time, brought himself to such a terrible and painful state. Due to his irritability, Claydon was ready to constantly explode at the magician, who continued to do nothing. But the wizard had such an impudent character that he didn't care about his master's words. But he became interested in the tea that Amelia had recently brought to the emperor with such care. Maurice had no idea that it was this tea that was poisoned, and that Claydon had deliberately given it to him to drink. Unpleasant suspicions stirred within Raven, and he turned out to be right about the ruler. The whole thing was that Claydon deliberately got his friend drunk so that he would find an antidote faster. Maurice had never encountered such cunning and treachery from the ruler before, so he was horrified. Only the belief that the magician would cope with the task allowed the emperor to do so. But Maurice still experienced shock, as the nasty poison had already begun to take over his body. It really wasn't difficult for him to create a spell that quickly neutralized all the poison. So, after just a minute, Claydon finally felt better and breathed a sigh of relief. Maurice was sure that this poisoning was not used for murder at all, which was strange. Locarso admitted with difficulty that this tea had been made for him by his faithful assistant from the north. As he expected, Maurice immediately accused the girl of an attempt on the emperor's life, which had failed. But the ruler believed that Amelia would not kill him in this way. He knew that Lady Valet was too clever and would have carried the matter through to the end if she had wanted to. But Ravaillain did not support the master's opinion, since this situation seemed superficial to him. But the magician had no chance to argue with Claydon, who had already made up his mind. So Maurice had no choice but to silently submit to the stubborn emperor. Although, in his opinion, no one could trust a girl who belonged to the Valet family, the magician's truthful words only angered Claydon, who had feelings for Amelia, even more. Ravaillain did not expect that in a minute he would anger the ruler so much, and that there would be no escape from his wrath. Locarso was most angry because the wizard did not appear to him after ascending the throne. If it weren't for the magician's inaction, this whole situation could have been avoided at the very beginning. Maurice had many excuses, but the truth was that he was afraid to show himself to the master. But in fact, the ruler was not so stupid as to kill such a wise and experienced magician. Although anger clouded Claydon's eyes, he still managed to pull himself together because he needed to find the culprit. Until the very end, Maurice proposed punishing Amelia, since he considered her to be the instigator of the poisoning. The wizard was accustomed to the fact that criminals were never shown any mercy and were destroyed immediately. That is why he insisted on punishment for Lady Valette, who was the most suspicious person, while the emperor demanded that Maurice find the real culprit of the situation. Once again, Ravana could only sigh silently, since he could not disobey. If Locarso had made a decision, there was no point in saying it was wrong. So the mage acted wisely when, instead of arguing, he activated the spell for movement. He was only interested in what would happen if the culprit turned out to be one of the opposing families. But deep down, Claydon was counting on this very outcome, because it would be very beneficial for him. Meanwhile, the heroine did not even suspect what danger hung over her head. All night long, her father's instructions, which the girl had stupidly disobeyed, were running through her head. And now she had no idea how to continue to maintain a relationship with the handsome ruler of the empire. Lately, the guy's face brought the lady genuine joy, so she tried to help him. Amelia herself didn't notice how a sweet smile periodically blossomed on her face next to Claydon, but it turned out that all her attempts to get closer to him did not bring any results, because the guy remained cold. This made Lady Valette barely force herself to go to the office to continue serving the ruler. As soon as the girl left, Morris immediately materialized in her room to search for evidence. The guy didn't know where such a northern girl could hide something dangerous to society, so his first find was an ordinary pair of women's pajamas, which he accidentally grabbed in his hands. And only after this did Maurice discover that very jar of tea that was full of poison. Raven's intuition told him that the criminal would not leave evidence in plain sight, but he had been shirking his duties for so long that he was accidentally caught in the middle of a secret investigation. Amelia was in real shock when she saw some unfamiliar guy in her room. Due to confusion, Maurice initially said that he had come for the girls' pajamas, although this was not true. When he realized his mistake, it was too late to say that he was only looking for tea. For the first time in his life, Raven found himself in such a delicate situation, because before he had always been more attentive. It was not at all surprising that Amelia perceived the stranger as a terrible pervert. Maurice was horrified by the lady's stories of what was done to such people on the northern borders. The guy didn't even have time to properly explain that a huge mistake had been made, and he was innocent. To his surprise, Lady Valet knew how to hit in the sore spots, so the magician barely managed to dodge. Until the very end, he held tightly to the tea jar, which became evidence in this case. As soon as Amelia saw the tea, her expression changed, because she didn't want anything to happen to him. But Maurice could not give up such an important piece of evidence, which was the main part of the crime against the Emperor. Only now did he introduce himself as the chief magician, because before that, the situation did not allow it. But Lady Valet didn't believe that Raven would need her pajamas to sleep in. As soon as the girl heard that Clayton was poisoned by tea, she forgot about her clothes. She didn't even need proof from Maurice to believe the whole situation. This news burned out all of Amelia's emotions, and only a huge emptiness remained inside. At that moment, the magician felt sorry for this girl, who did not look like a real criminal. But the fact remained a fact, and the Emperor was poisoned after drinking tea from the north. Maurice could smell the poison in the tea box, so he didn't need any more proof. Of course, Lady Valet had no intention of killing the ruler, for whom she had good feelings. The first thing the girl thought was that Clayton was trying to set her up in this way. She initially suspected that no cooperation would work out between Locarso and Valet. And now, Miss saw no point in resisting her fate, even if prison awaited her. The saddest thing was that Amelia didn't show anyone the tea from the north, because people weren't interested. Maurice understood that if the aristocrats did not touch the tea, then only Lady Valet could be suspected. That is why the girl was ready to go to execution, even if she would never see her family again. For the first time in his life, the magician saw humility and calmness that struck him to the depths of his soul. As soon as he admitted that Clayton had ordered the lady's innocence to be proven, surprise appeared on her face. Seeing the lady's reaction, Maurice was finally convinced that she was not a criminal. So now the magician only had to find the real culprit to complete this matter. Raven often liked to brag without reason, and now was just one of those important occasions. The lady's fear eased a little when she realized that Clayton had not set her up in this situation. Now in Maurice's face, she saw hope that she could prove her loyalty to the ruler. Amelia's thoughts were consumed by the desire to find the criminal, since the Emperor's life was at stake. And Raven shared the girl's opinion, because this was precisely what the stubborn Locarso had sent him for. But the magician and the maid didn't even have time to take action before someone invaded the lady's room. It turned out that Lucy Beauregard had a grudge against Lady Valet, who had taken her place in the palace. The butler ran into the room after her, wanting to prevent any possible quarrels. Lucy was sure that Amelia had invited some guy into her room. She had no idea that Maurice had permission to wander throughout the entire imperial palace. Only Kamer immediately realized that there had been no incident in Lady Valet's room. Yun was most afraid for Lucy, who was behaving too provocatively and could get hurt. Beauregard calmed down only when she heard that the court magician was in front of her. But she so wanted to believe that Amelia was doing something indecent that she could not remain silent. The heroine could only sigh silently, watching the explosive nature of this girl. She rarely saw Lucy, but she remembered that she felt a burning hatred and anger towards her. This is because it was Lady Beauregard who served the Emperor until she was removed. So it was not surprising that the young aristocrat had many complaints about the lady from the north. But Amelia's incomprehensible logic baffled everyone who tried to accuse her. Beauregard had a lot of stubbornness, so she still insisted that the knave was a bad servant. No matter how much the butler tried to calm the girl down, she ignored all his words. She was partly right, because before that, Maurice and Amelia had loudly quarreled due to misunderstandings. But Lady Valet had no intention of explaining anything to her rival, so she stubbornly remained calm. Therefore, Raven had to justify himself in this situation, saying that he was on assignment from the ruler. However, even this fact did not calm Lucy, who always had a hot temper. Only when the magician started talking about the fact that he was investigating a crime did the lady fall silent. From the very beginning, Maurice suspected Lorigard, so he gave the box of tea to Amelia. As soon as Lucy realized that this tea could end up in the Emperor's hands, she began to panic. The heroine immediately found these actions strange because the girl could not have known about the poison. Lucy's strange behavior suggested to the magician that it was she who had added the poison to the box. Now, the guy had no intention of giving the tea from the north to the criminal who was trying to save herself. Lorigard screamed that such a terrible drink could not be presented to His Majesty, but Amelia was able to stand up for tea, which was produced in her homeland only from safe ingredients. The girl quickly proved that there was actually nothing bad or dangerous in the northern drink. Once again, everyone was surprised that Lady Valette was paying attention to unnecessary things, but Maurice was finally convinced that with such thinking, the lady would stay in the palace for a long time. Amelia was sure that it was Lucy who mixed a strong poison into her tea, so she whispered to the girl that she would be happy to treat her to a northern drink a little later. Fear made Lorigard recoil from the knave, who was increasingly frightening her with her behavior. Because of her stupidity, Lucy quickly found herself at a disadvantage, as she couldn't think of anything to do. She had specially invited the butler along, and now he was just an unnecessary witness. The lady did not expect to see a court magician, who was a significant figure, in her rival's room, so she had no choice but to invite Amelia to an urgent tea party. Even if there was poison in the tea, Lucy was not afraid of it, because she brought the antidote with her. But Jack will probably get sick, since Lorigard will not share the saving potion against the poison. Of course, the heroine had no intention of agreeing to this proposal, which was dangerous for her. Maurice came to Amelia's aid, knowing what words to use to put pressure on the aristocrat. More than anything in the world, Lucy wanted to get rid of the evidence, and the wizard could allow her to do this. Hope appeared in the girl's eyes when Raven promised to give her the box of tea. Since the investigation had already been carried out, the magician no longer needed any evidence. Only Amelia was worried that Lucy tried to poison her and harmed the Emperor. Inside the girl, everything burned with the desire to achieve justice so that no one else would suffer. But her father's words were deeply imprinted on Lady Valet's memory, so she could not bring herself to speak. Until now, returning home had been a priority for the heroine, no matter how disgusting it made her feel. So she allowed Morris to let Lucy go, who had learned an important lesson. But no one believed that Lorigard would no longer try to harm her quiet rival. However, now the magician did not want this conflict to go beyond the imperial palace. Lucy herself didn't realize how lucky she was, so she continued to act proud. But in the end, the girl ran away with a box of tea to hide all the evidence of the crime. Only after this did everyone breathe a sigh of relief, as the young aristocrat was hard to bear. Raven was amazed at how Kamer handled his job, which consisted of such small details. Neither Amelia nor Maurice ever told the butler what exactly happened in the room. Yun was smart enough not to ask any more questions on this sensitive topic. Only now did he remember that Amelia had been called to talk by Clenil's assistant. Only this man has survived under the Emperor's watchful eye, helping him. Everyone agreed that Heinz was worthy of respect, although he did not always come to the right conclusions. After all this incident, the magician had only one question left for the young girl. It turned out that Amelia had returned to the room to write her resignation letter. Maurice could not have imagined that the reason for Lady Valet's return was so sad. The whole point was that the heroine believed that she had ruined all relations with the Emperor. Her heart still broke with pain when she remembered how Claydon had driven her away. The more the magician watched the girl, the more questions her logic raised in him. Amelia's thoughts were elusive and incomprehensible to people who had never lived in the north. But the girl was just trying to remain an inconspicuous person in the imperial palace. But with her advice, she put herself above Claydon, which made her feel guilty. That's why Lady Valette wanted to make things right by asking for forgiveness and dismissal. But she didn't expect that Maurice would suddenly forbid her to appear in the ruler's office today. In fact, the magician believed that the girl needed to rest after everything that had happened. But Lady Valette was one of those people who could not ignore unpleasant circumstances. Only now did Raven realize that the poison situation was too serious for Amelia. Everything inside the lady burned with the desire to ask for forgiveness, even if she was not to blame. But the magician knew that thoughts about Claydon's weakness would cause irritation and anger within him. It was in Locarso's nature to pretend that the poison had not actually harmed him. Amelia had little understanding of the people who had always lived in the center of the empire, so she was surprised. Only now did the lady realize that yesterday the ruler had been suffering from terrible poisoning all the time. So his angry reaction was caused by pain, not by deep hatred towards her. This made the girl feel a little better, because everything wasn't as scary as she thought. Maurice's words gave Lady Valette hope that nothing had changed between her and Claydon, so she didn't need anything else, and even Lucy's punishment didn't seem important now. The amount of kindness and nobility in the lady amazed Maurice, who rarely encountered such qualities. At this point, the guy had to say goodbye, so as not to reveal his emotions towards the lovely girl. He still wanted her to give herself time to rest and not worry about what happened anymore. But what happened just for one night still didn't fit into Amelia's head, that she wasn't ready. She could hardly believe that Claydon had personally come to her defense, no matter what. So the lady remembered the butler's request to come to Clinell only at the very last moment. As soon as the emperor felt better, he immediately returned to his work. Therefore, by the time the magician returned, Locarso had a lot of time to talk with him. Although Maurice remained loyal to the ruler, he refused to take on too difficult work. Raven always preferred to make do with small sacrifices, so as to have to do practically nothing. But this time he brought useful information to Claydon, because he found out a lot about Amelia. The magician was sure that the girl had no fiancé, and her heart was full of pure thoughts. It was no surprise that Locarso was angry with his assistant for conducting further investigation. But Maurice was not afraid of punishment, because this information was useful for the young ruler. The only thing the magician didn't take into account was the question of whether he had told the lady from the north about the poisoned tea. In that situation, Raven would have looked like a pervert if he had tried to hide his investigation, so he had no choice but to tell Lady Valette the whole truth. This news seriously angered the emperor, who did not want Amelia to be involved. Only Maurice's words that the girl was worried about the ruler calmed him down a little. Claydon was pleased to realize that the count's daughter had some feelings for him. The only question that remained was what to do with the real culprit of this incident. Raven easily figured out that Lucy was targeting Amelia, but things didn't go according to plan. In fact, Locarso initially suspected someone from the unpleasant Lorigard family. The magician could have helped the ruler with the punishment, but he understood that Claydon would hardly agree to this. Even now, the emperor was only worried about the fact that someone dared to harm his servant. Only the wizard's foresight was able to calm the boy's hot temper a little. Maurice promised that Lucy would not be able to tell anyone about what happened because of the spell. So now Claydon could only worry about Amelia, who was drawn into this situation. The emperor was surprised that the girl did not sleep all night because of anxiety. Locarso would not want to become the person who causes inconvenience to the young lady. In this situation, even Maurice could not help the ruler, because this matter did not concern him. But the magician was worried about the relationship between the emperor and Count Valette, who lived in the north. All this time, Claydon drove away unpleasant thoughts about that stern man. But he had many reasons for hatred, because the count never helped the future ruler. Maurice had the power to punish anyone remotely, if Locarso so desired. But the ruler was so ashamed of his behavior in the north that he had no intention of taking revenge on the knave. The whole point was that in order to survive, the guy often resorted to extremely unpleasant measures. A few years ago, Claydon had a difficult time in the north, as he was in exile. At that time, the guy didn't even have a normal house where he could wait out the terrible cold. So soon the young man was forced to turn to the count for help in asking for clothes. But the knave could not tolerate the heir's arrogant attitude, so he cruelly drove him away. But Claydon hoped that any house in the north would be ready to help him. In the end, everything turned out that all the people around drove away the heir, who was impudent. At that moment, the prince did not know how to ask politely, and therefore received refusals from everywhere. That's how he wandered up to the stable with the sheep, who were warm and cozy. Unlike him, the cold made Locarso ready to break the law, as he did not want to die in the north. So, as soon as he saw the opportunity to get warm, he took advantage of it without thinking. At that moment, Claydon did not feel sorry for the sheep he was about to leave without wool. But even this warmth did not save the young man for long, as he was not prepared for the northern conditions. He managed to arrange a small dwelling for himself, but it was so different from the conditions of the palace So every moment, the guy continued to wait for someone from the capital to come and pick him up. As soon as he heard some clattering, Clayton joyfully ran out into the cold street. But it turned out that one of the northern mules had approached his shelter, and there was no escape. The worst part was that Locarso was given a warning because he was meddling in something that wasn't his business. Count Valet was very angry with the guy for daring to touch his property in the form of animals. At that moment, Clayton finally realized that he had nowhere else to turn for help. But the emperor did not expect that this story would become known to the magician, who was not in the north. It turned out that Father Locarso had ordered Maurice to keep an eye on his errant son every week. That is why Raven was well aware of all the adventures of the ruler in the cold north. Then, out of stupidity, Clayton made many mistakes, as a result of which he barely survived. Once he even cut down the sacred tree of the northern inhabitants to strengthen his home. Looking back, the guy realized that he would have done everything differently now, just to avoid getting into trouble. He did not blame Maurice, who always remained a silent observer on the sidelines. One day, Clayton finally encountered Count Valet, who personally punished him for his misdeeds. This physical pain was a good lesson for Locarso, who had previously not valued other people's things, but the experience in the north helped the emperor become stronger and better, so he did not regret anything. He was only interested in whether Maurice had reported all the information to the previous ruler. It turned out that at that moment, the magician was already on Clayton's side, so he kept silent about a lot of things. This created a feeling of gratitude within Locarso, who could not have asked for more. Until now, he had received such devotion only from Emilia, although she was from the north. But the guy continued to deny the fact that he had any romantic feelings for the lady. In his mind, such a thing was unthinkable, because the count would never accept the emperor as a groom. Maurice didn't care about the ruler's feelings, since he had enough problems of his own for the day. However, he listened to the thoughts of Locarso, who rarely had the opportunity to speak out to anyone. In the eyes of the emperor, Emilia was the ideal servant who adapted to his desires. In the past, Clayton could not even dream of finding such a good assistant for himself. But now he had no doubt that he could trust the lady, even though her father hated him. That is why the emperor was so angered by Maurice's thoughts, that Emilia might be under the count's influence. Raven himself did not have time to notice how he had provoked the ruler's anger, because he was an emotional person. So it all came down to Clayton remembering the magician's unfinished business. Only a quick escape to the Tower of Magic saved Raven from possible punishment for idleness. As soon as the assistant disappeared, the emperor's thoughts returned to Lady Valet. She truly occupied a huge place in his heart, because she did not succumb to his beauty. So even while working, the guy thought about what the girl was doing now. But Lady Valet had no time to think about the emperor, because she had a meeting with the manager ahead of her. All of Emilia's excitement turned into curiosity, because she treated Clanel well. It turned out that the man was overloaded with work after the reshuffle from the ruler. Marquis Rune also said that it was a bad idea to reduce the number of workers in the palace. But Clayton wouldn't listen to anyone, so only 2 people were responsible for all the finances. That's why Heinz needed help, and he was glad to see a girl who didn't refuse him. His only assistant, Adonis, was a pleasant and obedient young man, so Clanel wasn't afraid to tell all the secrets in the presence of the guy, who would remain silent. Lady Valette initially suspected that Heinz had some business with her, but she would not have guessed that they were talking about an expedition to her family's northern possessions. The girl remembered well that Clayton was still pressuring the aristocrats about the cave. And now Clanel was trying to build a path, since the connecting bridge had recently been destroyed. Although Locarso gave the order to send the mages, they would not be able to cover the long distance by flight. So Heinz hoped that Emilia would suggest him some new and useful solution to this situation. And the man turned out to be right, since Lady Valette knew how to get to the north by water. Clanel was delighted with the idea because he hadn't thought of anything like it himself. It was not in vain that he called the girl for help, because no one would know the northern territories better than Emilia. As a token of gratitude, Heinz was prepared to convey some message from the lady to her house. The heroine missed her loved ones greatly, but until now she had not thought about contacting them. But she did have a beautiful scarf that the lady's relatives would have been happy to receive. When all the issues were settled, the assistant brought his report to the emperor for verification. Locarso immediately noted how wise the proposal was to send the detachment by water. The only thing he didn't like was the fact that Clenel called his personal servant for help. Once again, the assistant found himself in a situation where he wanted to do the best, but it didn't work out. And now he had accidentally provoked the emperor's wrath, which was based on fierce jealousy. Poor Heinz didn't have enough sense to understand why exactly the ruler was angry with him, so all that was left for Clenel to do was to endlessly make excuses in the hope that he would be forgiven. If only the assistant had been wiser, he could have avoided a lot of problems. And in the end, he always ran into Clayton's anger, although it seemed to him that he had done nothing. And this time, Clenel did not understand why the emperor was asking him to give up the handkerchief in his hands. Heinz himself had long since forgotten that this scarf once belonged not to him, but to Amelia. However, he did not dare to argue with the gentleman, so he obediently got rid of the handkerchief. Immediately after this, Clayton's face lit up, as if he had not just been infinitely angry. Until the assistant left, the ruler pretended to be satisfied with the current situation. But in reality, jealousy was gnawing at him inside, because he decided that Lady Valet had a lover, although Maurice was talking about something completely different. To whom then did the girl decide to send her beautiful scarf? This whole situation angered the ruler so much that he began to curse the magician out loud. As a result, Raven appeared at exactly the moment when the young ruler did not need him at all. The wizard was very interested to know what exactly he had managed to lie to his master about recently. Morris always tried to maintain the last vestiges of honor and dignity as a magician, but the ruler could not order his assistant to find out whether Amelia's heart was truly free. The emperor had accidentally driven himself into a trap, and now he saw no way out. After several hours of long reflection, Clayton finally realized what he should do. He knew for sure that he was not ready to share the girl who had taken a place in his heart with anyone. All these emotions and feelings were unusual for a ruler who had never charmed anyone before. But he wanted Lady Valette to look with her beautiful eyes only at him from now on. And for this, the ruler was not afraid to even fight with her family, just to achieve the desired goal. A saving idea suddenly came to Clayton's mind when he was no longer waiting for any decision. All he had to do was become Amelia's number one for her to love him. All the girls always succumbed to the handsome ruler with ease, so he had no doubt of victory. While the heroine herself did not yet suspect what exactly awaited her in her relationship with the emperor, she came to him to ask for forgiveness for everything, but she stopped awkwardly at the entrance. For some reason, the lady felt like there was a very ominous and terrifying energy emanating from Clayton's office.